Hello, and welcome to I Love Art, which is an art appreciation program that I created for ICW residents. My name is Kara Schul, and I am the program manager at Intentional Communities of Washtenaw. And we have been exploring art for the past 12 weeks. We will continue into the future, but I wanted to take this time to review and reflect and really think about all of the really good work that we have done so far. So please join us as we explore I Love Art. We started out this program looking at probably the most famous painting in the world, and that is the Mona Lisa. And the way that I've structured this program is that we really focus on one masterpiece. And the beginning of our program each week, we look at that masterpiece in great detail. We look at the colors. How does the artist use primary colors, secondary colors? How does the artist mix colors? And we really examine the painting to see the artist's use of color within that painting. Then the next thing we do is we go back and analyze the masterpiece again, and we look at shapes. How does the artist use various shapes within this piece of art? Then we look at it a third time for perspective. Which things are closer, which things are further away, what takes up more space within the piece of artwork. And finally, I always ask every week, we do this deep analysis, and then I always ask about the aesthetic. Do you like it? What do you think of it? Is this something that's appealing to you? Because that's always important. It's important to look at art with a good critical eye, but then it's also important to just say, is this something you like? So our first week, our masterpiece that we explored was Mona Lisa. The artist who painted Mona Lisa was Leonardo da Vinci, and he painted Mona Lisa in about 1503. Each week when we look at the one masterpiece and the artist, we also always think about other pieces of art that the artist created. And Da Vinci was very well known for his drawings, for his paintings, inventions, all kinds of wonderful things. So these are a few other pieces of artwork by Leonardo da Vinci. The Mona Lisa, if you wanted to go see the Mona Lisa today, you would go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. And when we looked at the Louvre, we watched some different videos and talked about the Louvre. And one thing that we talked about is how the museum itself was a palace, a French palace at one time. And then the pyramid piece here was added on as a more modern sculpture. And it's a part of the Louvre, and it's a piece of artwork in itself. Then each week when we look at a piece of artwork, we look at the museum, and then we also look at the city where it's housed. And the Louvre is in Paris, France, and we went on a city tour of Paris. We looked at the Eiffel Tower, all the different sightseeing highlights of Paris. We looked at an outdoor cafe where the French love to grab a cup of coffee and sit outside and enjoy the cafe. And of course the boat tour, the River Seine. So those were our highlights when we visited Paris. Week 2. We again used the same format where we started out looking at colors. And this week's color is very different from the Mona Lisa. The sunflowers is a lot of brighter colors, a lot of oranges, yellows, but there's also a fair share of other colors in there as well, which we look at in great detail. And then of course we go to shapes and see what kind of shapes. Circles, oblong, ovals, rectangles, different shapes, triangles that the artist used to depict this beautiful painting. Perspective. This one is very close up on flowers. And of course, then always ask, do you like it? Sunflowers was painted in 1888 by Vincent van Gogh. And this is a self-portrait of Van Gogh. He did many, many different self-portraits in his career. In fact, when we look at other art by Van Gogh, here's another self-portrait. And then he also did other famous paintings. Probably his other famous painting is right here called Starry Night. And then some other wonderful paintings by Van Gogh. Van Gogh's paintings are available all over the world, and we sometimes see them when we go to other museums. But Sunflowers is located at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And so this is the museum that we went to on our tour when we looked at Sunflowers as our masterpiece. Of course, we did our city tour of Amsterdam and looked at the country of the Netherlands as well. Just like in Paris with the river, we have a beautiful river, which is an integral part of Amsterdam. We saw that on our city tour. And we learned that the people in the city a lot of times go around on bicycles or on boats, which are both in this photograph here. And then the Netherlands is also known for its windmills, and it's also known for its beautiful, beautiful tulips. And we have a city in Michigan called Holland, Michigan, which is similar to Holland in the Netherlands. And we were able, when we went on our tour, to see a beautiful tulip cam, to see the spring tulips in bloom. Week 3 of I Love Art, we looked at this painting called Dance at the Moulin de la Galette. This painting is again very different from the other 2 weeks so far, in that this one is very different in perspective, very busy, a lot of people. This is a very different kind of painting. We look at the colors, we look at the shapes, we look at the perspective. We talk about how the artist uses all of these techniques in creating this masterpiece. The painting Dance at the Moulin de la Galette was painted by Pierre-Auguste Renoir in 1875. And this is a self-portrait of Renoir. You can see his paintbrush in his hand in this painting. Renoir painted many other beautiful, beautiful paintings, including some that are shown here. And if you want to see the dance at the Moulin de la Galette today, you would go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, France. And this was actually our second trip to Paris, so we looked at some different things. Paris has so many beautiful sites that we can see different things each time we go. And the Musée d'Orsay in itself is one of the pieces of art. It was a train station, and then it was converted to the museum as it is today. So we looked at the beautiful architecture, we looked at the history of it as a train station, and when it was changed to become a museum. Because we had been to Paris before, we still caught a few other highlights like Notre Dame and the Arc de Triomphe. And then we also took an opportunity to go to another really famous site in France, which is in Giverny, France, Monet's Gardens. And these are beautiful, beautiful gardens, and we were able to see how a lot of the French Impressionists were really influenced by the beauty of nature. Week 4 of I Love Art, we decided to focus on a piece of art that was different from the first 3 weeks, and that's a piece of sculpture. And we focused on this sculpture here called Little Dancer, age 14. The nice thing, this video, or this is just a slide, a single picture, but when we looked at it, we saw it in a video as well. So we were able to go all the way around this sculpture so we could see it from the front, from the sides, from the back, which is really important when looking at sculpture. It's important to see all the angles. We looked at it from the perspective of examining color, examining shape, and examining perspective. This is a little different in sculpture. The artist had the three-dimensional aspect, especially with shape, of making the shapes come to life in a sculpture. Little Dancer, age 14, was sculpted by Edgar Degas in about 1880. And Degas loved ballerinas. The Little Dancer was a ballerina herself at the Paris Opera, which there's a picture here of the Paris Opera, and then many other studies of ballerinas. These are all different Degas pieces of art. Little Dancer, age 14, can be seen today at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. So when we went on our trip that week to Washington, D.C., we looked at the sculpture gardens in and around the National Gallery. And here are a few pieces of sculpture that are located in the outside of the building, which are beautiful pieces of art and sculptures in their own right. We also did a city tour of Washington, D.C., saw all the highlights, and we were very pleased to have visited Washington, D.C., and we saw the beautiful cherry blossoms. That's always a highlight, a beautiful highlight of the city, Washington, D.C. Week number 5, we traveled to see the dance on the banks of the Manzanares. In this painting, we again looked at color. And I want to really remind everyone what you talked about when we looked at color. Because, for example, the clouds. We might think clouds are white, but when really examining the colors the artist uses, we see that there are all kinds of different colors of paint to create those clouds. So they're not just white, they have all kinds of different colors in them. And that's a really important thing when we examine art and we appreciate art. We looked at shapes, how the artist had people dancing and in motion, how the artist used the shapes to create the tree branches in each piece of this painting. This painting, The Dance on the Banks of the Manzanares, was created in 1777 by Francesco Goya. Self-portrait there. And Goya painted many, many paintings He painted many paintings of the royals in Spain, and you can see some of these paintings here when we look at other artworks that were created by the same artist, Goya. If you want to see the dance on the banks of the Manzanares today, you would go to the Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain. Another beautiful piece of architecture in the museum itself. And then, of course, we did our tour, our city tour of Madrid. We saw the beautiful sights of Madrid. And of course, we highlighted Spanish music and Spanish flamenco dancing. And we watched a video of flamenco dancing, which was great fun. Week number 6, we studied a painting called American Gothic. And we started out with colors and looked at the colors that the artist used in creating this painting. So when looking in great detail, we noticed, for example, the pin on the woman's dress is similar in color to the barn. So the artist used those colors to draw things together. We looked at the way the artist used color within the smock on her dress and all the different pieces within this painting. When we looked at shapes for this painting, we found many ways the artist connected the painting through using lines and curves and shapes. For example, the pitchfork with its shapes is very similar to the shapes in the man's denim of his clothing. And it's also similar to the window panes in the house. So we talked a lot about how the artist used shapes to create this painting. The long, narrow faces of the people, the long, narrow windows of the house. American Gothic was painted by an American artist named Grant Wood, and it was painted in 1930. This is a self-portrait that the artist did. He was born in Iowa, in the heart of Middle America, and he actually entered a competition, and the painting American Gothic was submitted to the Art Institute in Chicago as a part of the competition. He did not win first place, but he placed high enough that his painting was accepted at the museum and is one of the most famous and most recognizable paintings in the world today. In fact, American Gothic is so recognizable that it's made fun of quite frequently. And one thing we talked about when we studied American Gothic is how there are many parodies made of it, many jokes made of this painting, which we can see in some of these here. American Gothic, if you want to go see it today, you can go to the Art Institute of Chicago, which is not very far from where we live in Michigan. And many of us who were present that day have been to Chicago. So we had some nice stories to recall times that we visited the city of Chicago. And this picture here is at the Art Institute of Chicago. When we visited Chicago to study American Gothic painting, we also took a city tour. There's a beautiful skyline in Chicago and the famous sculpture called the Bean. And then, of course, there's the river and Navy Pier. Very famous sites in Chicago. One thing that we did when we were touring Chicago is that we went to the aquarium. And we had the pleasure of seeing a little penguin named Remington who went on a field trip outside of his normal habitat in the aquarium. Due to the shutdown at that time of the museum, of the aquarium, the zookeepers wanted to keep the penguins occupied and happy and interested, so they let them walk out freely within the aquarium because there were no guests. People were not allowed into the aquarium. So the penguins, like Remington, got to run around the aquarium and visit the other animals, the other fish and whales and dolphins and other animals there. So that was fun. We watched some videos of Remington and his buddies having field trips around the aquarium. Week 7, we studied a painting called Shakuntala. And this painting, we really had some nice conversation about the color and the way the artist used color. There's yellow that is reflected in the ground, coming out from the sky, reflected in the mountains, the people, beautiful oranges, reds, and then also greens in the trees and the grasses, and of course the browns of the trees, the mountains. Beautiful, beautiful use of color by this artist in the painting Shakuntala. We also looked at shapes. How does the artist use shapes like the circular shape of the flowers, or the hair, the woman's hair, or almost a triangular shape of the flower necklace? And then, of course, how the artist has the people speaking to each other and then one woman looking off at something that we don't see, looking out of the picture. So it's very interesting when we have these discussions and we look at all these different pieces that an artist puts into creating a beautiful masterpiece. Shakuntala was painted in 1870 by Raja Ravi Varma, famous Indian painter. And Raja is a title. That's a title of respect. So that was given to him. He was very popular as an artist with the aristocracy, with the nobles, with the people of the ruling class within India. He painted many very famous people who were famous at that time period in India. So he was given this title of great respect to honor his artwork and all the wonderful things that he created. And we can see some of the paintings, some of the other artworks that Raja Ravi Varma created. He painted the beauty of the Indian people, not always just the higher class royals, sometimes the more regular people as well, but also many paintings of the soldiers and the higher up people in the nobility of India at that time period. Shakuntala can be seen today at the Kilimanur Palace in Kilimanur, India. And this was actually the birthplace of the artist, turned into a museum today. When we visited India, we not only saw the artwork of the artist, but we also saw probably the most famous world wonder of the world, the Taj Mahal. And we looked at the story, the beautiful story behind the Taj Mahal, the beautiful architecture of the Taj Mahal, and we really enjoyed visiting that landmark, that wonder of the world. The other piece that we looked at when we studied India is that we watched some film clips of Bollywood, which is great fun. Dance routines, great productions. So we enjoyed that. Week 8, we traveled to Mexico to look at a portrait called Self-Portrait in a Red Velvet Dress. And this painting, again, we spent the beginning of our art appreciation by looking at colors, by looking at how the artist uses red for the dress, but it isn't just one shade of red, it's many shades of red. And there are pieces of brown and gold and different shades to create that beautiful red velvet dress. We also looked at the perspective in this one because we have a woman, she's the main piece in the frame, and then we have the ocean swirling behind her, which again goes back to our shapes and our colors, the very dark colors of the ocean swirling behind her. So we looked at all of those components when we studied this masterpiece, Self-Portrait in a Red Velvet Dress. And this painting was done by Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo painted many self-portraits, including Self-Portrait in a Red Velvet Dress, and she created that one in 1926. When we look at other pieces of art by Frida Kahlo, we see many, many self-portraits. She painted many self-portraits, and as we can see by looking at these, we learned about her that she loved dresses. She loved her Mexican heritage and the beautiful traditional dresses, the shawls, the putting things in her hair, beautiful flowers in her hair. And Frida Kahlo also loved animals. We looked at some of these other paintings where we noticed how she painted herself many times with animals in the picture. So we can think of her as probably having been an animal lover. If you want to see Self-Portrait in a Red Velvet Dress, you would go to the Frida Kahlo Museum in Mexico City, Mexico. This is also known as the Blue House. And it is actually where Frida Kahlo grew up. And today it is a museum. When we traveled to Mexico City, we did a city tour to learn about Mexico. We looked at a lot of the traditional garments that were worn, especially the dresses, like what Frida Kahlo loved, her Mexican heritage. And we talked about the holiday of the Day of the Dead. And this is an important holiday, similar in time period to Halloween, which we celebrate here. And in Mexico, they celebrate the Day of the Dead. And we also looked at a couple little film clips from the Disney movie Coco. Week number 9, we decided to go to another painting. We looked at this painting in New York, located in New York City, in a museum right now in New York City. And this is called And the Migrants Kept Coming. This painting is part of a series. There were 60 paintings in this series, and this is actually the very last one. This is number 60 in the series. And we had, as always, we looked at color. We started out looking at color in this one and saw how the people have different color jackets, different color hats, different color suitcases. We looked at the color of the children. We looked at the color of their faces. We looked at the color of all the different aspects of this painting. We also looked at shapes. And we noticed this was a very interesting use of shape here, in that there are train tracks, and the migrants were coming north during what was known at that time as the Great Migration, and they had fled the south and come north, in this case to New York City, and they had come by train. And we can see the train tracks here as they're coming to the train station. We looked at shapes. We looked at how the artist used shapes to create the train tracks, the benches, the people's clothing, and used shapes to make almost a texture so we could almost feel the wood in the background at the train station. Perspective, we talked about how there are a lot of people and they're crammed together. This was a big migration. Many, many people came north during that time period from the South in the United States, hoping for a better life, better jobs, better education. And this was also perspective, was that they were very, very close together, but then they were further apart where the train would have its room to transport them. And this series, The Migrants Kept Coming, and the whole series was painted by Jacob Lawrence, and this particular one was painted between 1940 and 1941. But as I said, there were 60 paintings in this series, so he created them over a long span of time for the whole series. And here are some other pieces of beautiful artwork created by Jacob Lawrence. You can see definitely his use of shapes, of the angles, his use of vibrant colors. And this series, out of the 60 paintings Half of them are located at this museum, which is where the migrants kept coming, is located now, and that's called the Museum of Modern Art, and that is in New York City. So we went on a city tour of New York City and saw many of the beautiful highlights, for example, the Statue of Liberty. And then we also talked about the time period when Jacob Lawrence was painting and how there was what was known as the Harlem Renaissance in New York City at that time period. And it was a wonderful time period for music. We have, in ICW, we have many music lovers, and so we played a few pieces of different music from that time period. Jazz music, singing, trumpet, piano, guitar, and beautiful, beautiful music that was created in New York City during the Harlem Renaissance. Week number 10 of I Love Art, we studied something different, which is a tapestry. So instead of a painting or a sculpture, this time we looked at a tapestry. And this is called the unicorn tapestry. So we went through our same procedure where we looked at the colors, we looked at the shapes, we looked at the perspective. But instead of the artist using paint this time, this was woven into a tapestry. So it was yarn that was used instead of paint. So we looked at the beautiful blues, the beautiful yellows and oranges, and those animals hidden among the flowers. And then in the very center of all is the beautiful unicorn. The unicorn tapestry is a textile art. So like I said, it's not paint. It's made from textiles, from yarn, woven onto a fabric. And it was created about 1500, so it was a very long time ago, over 500 years ago. And the artist is unknown. We don't know who created it. But tapestries like this were very often used in castles as wall hangings, and they were very large, and they would cover a wall to help not only to be beautiful as art is, but to help keep it a little bit warmer to insulate when the castle would get sort of big and drafty. So we looked at how that would have been used in a castle. So our discussion then, we talked about textile arts and different yarns and threads and how artists can create artwork through using weaving or knitting or crocheting or sewing. And so we looked at a lot of different textile arts this week when we were talking about the unicorn tapestry, and we watched a video on how a tapestry is made. And today, if you want to see the unicorn tapestry, it can be seen at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, England. And we had a great tour when we did a virtual tour of the Victoria and Albert Museum. We saw many different examples of textile art, of clothing as art, of dishes and glassware and crystal and all sorts of items that we use every day that are beautiful, beautiful pieces of art. When in London, we went on a London city tour. We saw the London Eye, which is like a Ferris wheel type, but much larger, that you can go up and see London from up in the sky. We talked about the Queen and how she has many properties like Buckingham Palace. And then, of course, we looked at the Queen's royal jewels, her gems, her jewelry. And this is one example of the royal jewels. Week 11, we traveled to another part of the world, and our masterpiece that we looked at was another piece of sculpture. And this was the King Tutankhamun golden mask. Beautiful, beautiful gold with inlay of stones. And we talked about how the artist used color, working with the gold and then bringing it out with other colors, the blues, the reds, how the artist used shapes. The biggest thing we talked about with this one were the lines, how the lines were used to have that beautiful bright blue contrast the gold. We had the serpent on the front of the king, and how the artist used all these different shapes to draw us in. The shape of the eyes, the shape of the ears, the shape of all the different pieces of this King Tutankhamun golden mask. King Tutankhamun golden mask was created in about 1500 BCE, which is before the Common Era. So this would be probably about 3,500 years ago. So this was very, very far back in time in ancient Egypt. And unfortunately, the artist or artists, probably many different artists who created the King Tutankhamun golden mask, is unknown. We don't know who created it. These were all created for the king. But you can see some more pieces of sculpture here, which are mostly all in gold. And then, of course, we looked at other treasures of King Tutankhamun. Beautiful, beautiful gold. We saw necklaces, jewelry, animals. The King Tutankhamun golden mask can be seen at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, Egypt. They are building a new museum in Cairo called the GEM, the Great Egyptian Museum, but that is not finished yet. It was supposed to have been finished by now. In the meanwhile, all of these treasures and many, many more from ancient Egypt are located in this museum, but it's jam-packed They need to build a larger museum to be able to show all these beautiful treasures that they found from ancient Egypt. And you can see some sculptures outside of the museum that are also were found in ancient Egypt. When we visited Egypt, we took some beautiful tours and ventured out to see the pyramids, the Sphinx, and of course the hieroglyphics, which is the way that the Egyptians wrote. And we had to learn to read that in order to read what they were talking about from ancient Egypt. Week 12 of our I Love Art, we decided to look at another different type of art, and that is postage stamps. So we went to a museum called we looked at two pieces of art known as the blue and red penny Mauritius stamps. So this was a little bit different because we didn't have the colors to look at as we normally do when we examine art. However, given that there's only the blue and white, and in the other one only the red and white, we looked a lot at how the artist did the shading to create this. We looked at the shapes, portraying, of course, the queen, which was the custom, and of course how the artist had to get the words in, the official words that needed to be part of it. So we looked at all of that when we looked at stamps as art during week 12. The blue and red penny Mauritius stamps were issued by the Post Office of Mauritius in 1847, and they were used, of course, to mail letters. But stamp collecting, we learned, can be very profitable, and these stamps are worth a lot of money today if they haven't been canceled. Now these were actually used on a letter, so they're not worth as much money. But the stamps, the blue and red penny stamps in Mauritius, are worth millions of dollars today if they're unstamped and in perfect condition. So what we looked at this week, which was a lot of fun, is we looked at how stamps are made. And we looked at stamps as art and stamp collecting and how artists make stamps and then how people appreciate stamps. And stamps are used all over the world. This museum is in Mauritius, but we have stamps here in the United States and all over the country. There are stamps that are used, as you can see from these depicted here. They're from other countries around the world. We visited the blue and red penny Mauritius stamps at the Blue Penny Museum in Port Louis, Mauritius. And there are other pieces of artwork at this museum, but its most famous pieces, of course, are those blue and red penny stamps, which are very famous and very valuable. We looked at our tour of the country of Mauritius, which, if you look at the globe, is located off the coast of Africa. It is an African country, but it's not within the continent, it's an island. And we looked at beautiful, beautiful footage videos of this beautiful tropical island. Waterfalls, the flowers, just a gorgeous, gorgeous place to visit. Mauritius. So that's the end of our review, thinking back to weeks 1 through 12 of I Love Art. I hope you have good memories of having been at some or all or most of our weeks as we have explored art, and I hope that you'll join us again as we continue our adventure that is I Love Art.